Please raise your right hand. Do you so solemnly swear that in the matter pending before this court you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Have a seat. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Amanda Bruce, Amanda Bruce.
And what was your maiden name?
Farris, Farris.
So you are the daughter of who?
My father, Gary Farris, and Melody Farris.
So speak into the microphone.
Sorry.
We'll take our time. So Amanda, you are of the four children. Which are you? The oldest, the middle, the youngest?
I'm the youngest.
All right. About what year were you born?
1989.
All right. So you don't remember much of living. Do you remember at all living in Alabama?
I have images in my head of like our playroom, but no, I moved here in kindergarten.
All right. And that would have been to Alpharetta or Atlanta?
Yes, sir, Alpharetta.
All right. So kind of tell the jury a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Farris household.
Honestly, when I was a child, everything was normal. Lived in a home in Alpharetta, which was normal, and we all went to school in kind of the same area.
Where'd y'all go to school?
I went to Chattahoochee High School. Brothers went to Milton, and then my sister also went to Chattahoochee as well.
Okay. So tell me about kind of everybody's, this jury has heard your siblings testify throughout this trial. So this is your kind of chance to explain what you saw growing up. You know, everybody's personality. Tell us how Chris was growing up.
Chris and I had the biggest age difference. He was 10 years older than I was, so I don't really recall a lot of interaction between him. He was just like the oldest brother. Moved out early. I must have been in middle school when he went to college. Scott, from our childhood when we lived in Alpharetta, like at Hampton Hall, he played football and he was a little bit more of an introvert. Chris was more of an extrovert. Emily, we were very close. We were 18 months apart, and so she was only a grade or two above me, and she was more introverted and I was a little bit more extroverted, but we were quite similar in ways.
Okay. So how was your parents' relationship back in those days?
Everything seemed about as normal. We didn't really take a lot of vacations or anything like that. We would go to the beach when my dad had a law seminar every once in a while, but looking back on it compared to what I do for my child, it was kind of just routine day in, day out things. Go to school, come home, clean house, wake up, do it all over again. So it was all very...
Did y'all have chores
normal.
Or how?
Oh, yes. We always had chores. Whether it be outside, inside, we had responsibilities, or at least I did.
Okay. So, the jury has heard quite a lot about, where everybody went in their life after they kind of graduated high school and the family began to grow up. So we'll start with you and then kind of tell me about your siblings.
Well, I graduated from high school and I went...
In 2008?
Correct, 2008, and immediately went down to Georgia Southern. Lived there for a couple of years, and then I actually moved back home, partially because I wasn't doing too well, and because my dad kind of wanted me to come home at that time. So
About what year would that have been?
2010. So I came back, and then I did some school at Georgia Perimeter College and finished up there, and kind of went into work at retail, and I found my love in retail.
And that would have been when you went to work for Tory Burch?
No, I actually worked for Victoria's Secret for a while, and then for an accounting firm. I was a server. I did a kind of, number of things, but eventually I found my dream job at Tory Burch, and they did a company restructure, and I didn't get to work there any longer because my my position in the company got eliminated. But then I worked at Club Monaco, which is a retail store at Lenox, and then I ended up having my son not too long after that. Well, I guess I worked in fine jewelry for a while too, for like 5 years, and Then I had my son, and I had to get out of retail.
So it's safe to say, prior to you having your son, you've always worked.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. So tell me about Emily.
Emily, she graduated high school. She went to the University of Alabama, did really well there. She's always been really smart. Always did really good in school. Graduated communications degree, I'm almost positive.
Okay.
And then that's when she met her husband, Chris Payne, and they ended up moving to Atlanta. Lived here for a while, like in the Dunwoody area, and then I think he may have gotten a job up in Tennessee, and they got married up there, and that's, I guess, where they've been ever since.
All right. And then tell me about Chris.
Chris went to University of Alabama for a couple of years, maybe 3, I'm not sure. Did not finish, and then I really don't know how long after that he met Kimberly, and they ended up pregnant with Ella, and they got married, moved up to Maine, had Addison, and then Chris came back after they got divorced, or during the divorce, something like that. But he moved back here, and he's been back here ever since.
Okay. How about Scott?
Scott graduated high school. Kind of worked odd jobs, I guess you would say, kind of like I did. And he worked at Jiffy Lube, he worked at car dealerships, he just kind of worked all over the place, honestly. And then he decided that he wanted to go into the Army, so he did that. I want to say, I know I spoke to him over the telephone, or not over the phone, but over chat, my freshman year of college. And he was not in there for very long. And next thing I knew, I did go out and visit him at the base in Texas for a little while. And when he had his girlfriend, Gina, who I later found out, I guess they were married. And then he came back here, from what I can recall.
Okay. So this phrase has been used, and it may be you that I heard it from originally, I can't remember. But would it be fair to call your family the Ferris wheel?
Unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let's kind of get into that, if we could, and kind of talk about, from your perspective, the personalities in the family and kind of the interplay of the siblings and the parents, and through the years how that kind of developed into 2018.
I wouldn't say that term really came along until we were adults. We were not in college or anything. I guess you could say we were in college, but there's always something going on.
Well, kind of give the jury a background of that, if you don't mind.
Chris, him and Kimberly got pregnant. They got married. They had their issues with their divorce, unfortunately. Scott going to the Army, getting out. He kind of just lived at home. He really didn't do much. Really kind of worked odd jobs all the time. I know he was working at the Nissan dealership when I got my car, and that would have my first and second car came from that same dealership, but I guess it was the first time. So that was a senior in high school. He was working there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, well, let me do this. Let's kind of work through personalities in this Ferris wheel. So let's start with Chris. What would you say Chris's personality is? And then give me some examples.
He was very extroverted. He was always the center of attention at, I could say at parties and things like that. But him and I, we were friendly. We were all friendly. We all got along. We all went to Christmas together, and we all were friends, I guess you would say, but we didn't know the inner workings of each other's lives. I don't know if I'm just kind of one of those people that likes to stay out of it, but there was just something always kind of going on. Everybody had their problems, but my sister, she had her things, and her husband was in and out of trouble, but Emily never did anything wrong. I think she is a great wife and a great woman. Scott, he just lived at home. Him and I really didn't get along. He was kind of aggressive towards me at times, but other times we were fine with each other. He was kind of a different character, but he was our brother.
What do you mean by that?
He was just very introverted. He didn't have a lot of friends. I don't know how to explain it. He just wasn't very much like us. But he just lived his own life, and we weren't involved with him. But we weren't involved with each other very much at all either. So it's like, it was what was it on the outside. It wasn't, we didn't really connect internally. So,
okay.
I don't know.
And then how would you assess your personality?
I like to think I'm a loyal person. I'm a caring person. I always like to believe the best in people. I almost to I don't want to say a fault, because I think everybody deserves a friend in this world, but I can be very introverted at times. But I like to have who my friends are. I passionately love them, and I would be there for them. But I like to consider myself kind of where I stand in the middle, where I like to evaluate everything from the outside. But I like to stay out of a lot of drama.
Okay. So we keep kind of touching around the outsides of the drama, but would you say on a scale of 1 to 10 that your family pre-2018 was 1 being very boring, not dramatic, 10 being as dramatic as it gets? What number would you give it?
It's hard to say, because that was our normal. I think there was always something going on in everybody's life. I tried to, all of this, I was just trying to get married and fall in love with the man that I wanted to marry. And my world got turned upside down. And I was just very much one of those, like, everybody else's problems are their own and I can't fix it. But it was tough. It's really hard to explain, but everybody had trauma and trouble and issues.
You use the past tense when you're talking about your siblings. Why is that?
We don't talk anymore.
They don't talk to you.
Communication is a two-way street.
So when's the last time you talked to your siblings?
Had to be probably end of 2019.
Okay. And why do you believe that is?
We had, this had something to do with it, but we had our own falling outs individually that I kind of refreshed my memory when I knew this was all happening, and reading through text messages and things like that. But Chris and I had a falling out a year prior. My husband and I always go to Lake Lanier Islands for the 4th of July. My husband grew up in that area and worked there for a very long time.
At Lake Lanier Islands?
At Lake Lanier Islands. So that was our tradition. We did it every year, ever since I knew him.
This would be the big beach at Lake Lanier?
Yeah, like what's now Margaritaville.
Okay. And we're going to talk about the 4th in 2018 in a minute.
This was
This is what you guys did every year.
Yeah, but this I'm talking about 2017.
Okay.
So we invited Chris and Jenna and the girls to come up with us to celebrate the 4th of July, and it ended up where we had spent the entire day out there, and they were drinking heavily, and we went to the Mexican restaurant on Friendship Road, and I pulled the girls in the bathroom, and I was like, listen, I can't let you drive with them. I was like, it's not safe. So they agreed, and we got in the car, and we took them back, as they were staying at Lake Lanier Islands Resort that night, and took them back. And shortly after that, I called my parents. Not that night, could have been a couple of days, I don't remember. But I told them, I said, Chris has a problem. He has a drinking problem, and those girls are going to get in an accident, and something bad's going to happen to them or somebody else. Well, it wasn't too long after that my brother decided to call my parents, and specifically my father, and say that he was having an affair with my mother, and accused. And that was pretty much from then on out. I'd never felt the same about Chris.
And so that was right around the 4th of July 2017.
Correct.
Was this also the time, were you aware of him threatening to kill your mother?
That happened after.
Okay.
I kind of piece it all together because I hear bits from people, but nobody tells me directly. Honestly, when that happened, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to be involved. I thought that was something that my parents should handle. They were the parents, they needed to handle it, and that's why I went to them about his problem, and because it wasn't my place to tell him he had a problem, and it was theirs as his parents. And I don't know if that was a result of that.
Did you know that it had almost a similar situation about Chris trying to leave with the girls, intoxicated? Did you know about that?
I slightly recall something of the sorts. I just remember telling my parents that the girls should not be driving with them if they were going to be drinking like that. And it was if it came to the point of me saying something to my parents, there was a reason. I did not feel like they were safe.
And so let's be clear. At that point, Chris, instead of stopping drinking or taking accountability for his actions, he decided to say that your fiance was having an affair with your mother.
That's what I can assume.
Okay.
Because there's no other reason for him. My husband was good friends with Scott and Chris before this. They went to an SEC football championship game together. Chad and my dad had a fantastic relationship before all of this happened. We went out there almost every weekend to have dinner with them. And we were there on his birthday on June 27th before he died. And we were the only ones there.
And we are going to talk about that weekend. So I want to back up too. So that's you brought up Chris and you brought up that incident, and we may just have to talk about moments in time that come back, because I understand that what you're currently going through in this moment is awful.
Yes.
And this is a very patient jury, and so we will get through it. Okay.
Okay.
But let's go back and let's talk about Scott. I want to talk about, he gets back from Iraq. Can you tell me about any specific instances you remember? You mentioned anger and things like that. Can you talk about that for the jury?
He was just very protective over the farm, and I never understood why we called it a farm, because it was a glorified petting zoo at most. But sorry,
they know they've seen it.
Sorry, we had a lot of animals growing up, and this was like that on steroids. It made no sense.
Well, then how did we wind up there? How did the family get to the farm?
That would be a great question. Ask my daddy. Because I don't know. There was a lot of things that happened before that moment that I think should have been taken care of before just putting money on it to fix it. Okay. I think a lot of things that have happened in our family get swept under the rug, and they're never addressed, and they're not taken seriously. But a sin is a sin, and I feel like this is a repercussion of all the sins that were committed over years, unfortunately.
This is sins by everybody in the family?
Everybody. False money idols. It was always what it looked like on the outside. It never mattered what it was on the inside. There was many things growing up, like our parents didn't really, they cared, but you had to figure it out for yourself. It wasn't, let me walk you through this, let me show you how to do this. I don't feel like it was ever that moment. So we kind of had to fend for ourselves a little bit in that aspect.
Well, let's talk. Let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about your mother. Let's talk about it. Growing up. It seems like, the jury's seen messages between you guys. It seemed like you guys were pretty close.
She was my mom, yeah.
All right.
She is my mom.
Right.
I've always cherished we had a great family growing up. It seemed like everything was normal. We lived in a great house, and Alfreda went to a good school, had never wanted for anything, or never needed for anything, I guess I should say. We were given everything. My dad provided everything.
Let's talk about your dad, and I'm bouncing now too. What was your dad like?
He was great.
Take your time. I feel like we've been in this trial for a while.
He was a very smart man. I'm sorry. There was no doubt in my mind he loved all of us. He made that known, and he was very sarcastic.
Lawyers are notorious for that.
He had the lawyer personality for sure, but I mean, he was the dad that you walk down the stairs and he'd whistle and go, "You're a movie star." Or when Emily had her baby, he texted me a picture of me holding Olivia, and he goes, "You're natural." Like, he was just so loving, and I can still...
Take your time.
He was just such a big man, and he'd come and he'd just wrap his arms around you. But then in this sense, he'd turn around and fart on you, and you'd just be like, like, he was sweet, and he was witty. He could say things that cut you to the bone. He definitely demanded respect in that aspect, I guess you would say. I was always fearful of him in the sense that I wanted to respect him, and I wanted him to be proud of me. And when he would make comments that I was not doing as well as I should, I took that to heart, and I really wanted to make him proud. He was a good dad. He was a good grandfather, and I wish my son could have seen that.
Could you tell the jury what his relationship was like with Chris, for example?
I mean, I never saw them really do much together, I guess you would say, but I mean, Chris was grown. I don't know much about their relationship when they were younger. I don't really recall. I know that they were in a lot of fights over the past years about money.
Could you explain that to the jury? Best you can remember.
The best I can remember. I mean, it sounds awful, but I mean, he had issues with taking money, and he expected, he always had his hand out, but I don't doubt that he didn't love my daddy. I approach things differently than my siblings did.
What does that mean?
Meaning I never wanted anything in return for his love. I just, especially right before he died, I just wanted a mother and a father, and that was it. I didn't want any more of the drama. I didn't want any more of their marital problems. I didn't want to deal with any of it. I just wanted a mom and a dad, and I wanted to get married, and I wanted them to watch my kids grow up.
Okay. So, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I think I heard in regards to Chris was he didn't have a very close relationship with your dad that you noticed. That I noticed.
I mean, it was all about the same. I mean, they'd have conversations at Christmas, but I don't know if he ever went out and like had dinner with him. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see it. They may have, but like my dad and I would meet up, and because I lived in Roswell, Buckhead area, and he would call me and he'd be like, "Hey, I'm leaving the office. You want to go meet at Cheesecake Factory?" And I'd say, "Yeah, let's go." And it would be just him and I. And so I don't know if they had that or not. I really don't.
Know. But you did know. And how did you know that he was stealing money from your dad?
Well, my mother made it very apparent. There was never any dirty laundry that the both of them weren't willing to air out to all of their children.
So
there was no
your dad
boundary.
would do that too.
Yeah, yeah.
So he would say, "Chris is stealing from me."
Correct.
Okay. And was that in the months and weeks leading up to his death?
Years.
For years?
It's been a problem for as long as as the girls have been around, as far as I'm concerned.
How would your brother do it? You say steal from him. How would that happen?
It was all things that I was told, whether it be my mom, mostly my mom, because I don't think my dad really liked to talk about those problems. He liked to complain to me about my mother. But I mean, it was well known that he would take checks and he would cash them. He would take credit card numbers and he would use the numbers off of them. Just always needing stuff for the girls. I don't just always had his hand out. I don't know how else to say it.
But Emily didn't do stuff like that, right?
She needed help from him. I think it was mostly for her husband. I know that she moved into our house in Thompson Station, and she would have not gotten that without him. He co-signed on an apartment in Atlanta because they couldn't get that on their own. But my dad co-signed for many things. Like, he co-signed on my second car. He didn't pay anything for it, but he co-signed on it. So
he was just helping out the kids in that regard.
You had to ask for it, but he was not just going to willingly give it out. But you definitely had to ask for it.
Okay. Well, speaking of asking for it, were you familiar in any way of how Scott would be paid or how he worked on the farm? Do you know anything about that?
They moved out there, and when I never really understood why they bought the house.
Did you ever hear, I'll maybe stop you to ask this question, did you ever hear that it was going to be kind of your mom and your dad's fresh start? Did you ever hear that?
That's what I assumed it had to have been, because we had a come to Jesus meeting about it, and we both knew. I said, you know what this is, you know who she is, you know who you are. I need you to make a decision. I was in a relationship with a loser for quite some time, and they both came down and got me out of that relationship, and him and I were at Tacos and Tequilas in Buckhead, and I said, Daddy, if this is the hard decision I had to make, you need to make that decision too. You need to be happy. I mean, I would text them when they would say, oh, Daddy, or Mama would send me something, a screenshot, or being mad with Daddy, and I'd be like, y'all need to figure this out. Like, y'all are going to have a heart attack one day. Or like Daddy would complain about something, and I'd be like, y'all need to figure it out. This is not my problem. It's just, I thought of that Purcell house as they both knew what they were getting into. And at that point, my hands were off of it. I said, that's y'all's problem.
Okay. So tell me if I'm wrong, because just going off the way you just said this. But it sounds like your parents, this is just how they were.
Yes.
And when I say the way they were, the kind of the way that they would just kind of bicker and complain about each other, that was just a two-way street, and that's what they did. That's how they communicated.
Yes. And that's what they both accepted and wanted to do.
That's what they wanted to do.
Yes. My dad told me, he said, I love her, and I'm not leaving her. So that was his choice, not mine. He knew my opinion.
Okay. But those strange maybe to the outside world, to them,
that was their choice.
That was life.
They were both adults. They knew exactly what they were doing.
So back to Scott, and how did it come to pass that he wound up on the farm that you knew of?
Because he couldn't make it on his own. It was kind of a running joke that he just was always going to, he'd complain that, oh, Mama told me to do this, or Daddy told me to do that. And I'm like, well, move out. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, don't live with your parents. They always said, oh, I'm going to work on the farm, or I'd work on the farm, and things like, yeah, he did. I mean, I guess, but so did my dad, so did my mom. It was a kid that was living at home. And that was about it.
Do you think he was taking advantage of them?
I think anybody who asks their parents for money over the age of 20, 25 are taking advantage of people. Okay. I think it's a moment in a person's life where you have to say, I'm an adult, I need to grow up.
Okay. Do you did you know about kind of his daily life, about him just playing golf and not really actually working on the farm very much?
It was off of what I was told.
Okay. Nothing you saw?
No. I mean, he was out there. When I went out to visit my parents, you couldn't go on the property without him he'd come up right in it immediately. But like, he would see what was going on, and then he would leave, and he would go back. Like Christmas, or even dinners on weekends when we would go. He would come in, make his plate, and he'd go back to his little apartment. And that was like the most we saw of him. And
like, he would take the plate and go back to the barn apartment?
Yeah. He never
wouldn't sit with the family?
No. Occasionally he would sit at the bar stool, like in the kitchen, but.
And this is Scott, not your dad?
Correct.
Okay. If you had to say which kids were closest to which parent?
I mean, my dad and Emily always had a really good relationship, but she lived in Tennessee, so that's kind of hard to judge.
Sure.
My husband is a really big advocate of family, and looking back on it, I didn't have that lovey-dovey family relationship that everybody grew up with, and I wanted to cultivate that, and I made an effort to spend that time with my parents. So we would go out there almost every weekend and have dinner with them. And I mean, I was looking back through our text messages, and it felt like every weekend, baby girl, when am I going to get to see you? I'll be up there this weekend. So I really tried to get as close as I possibly could, but my dad was really hard to get close to. He was very shut off to a certain point. But I think he did that because we were his kids. I think it was different for the other people.
Like what other people? Would it have been different?
Like my husband would have conversations with him. They would have great conversations from what I heard. Like when we went over there for dinners, they would go outside. My dad smoked cigarettes. Chad vaped at the time. They'd go outside and they would just chit chat. And they had great conversations. More than I could get out of him, I guess I should say.
Okay. So I want to start kind of moving into events in y'all's family life that would have been part of maybe the Ferris wheel, and get your version of the events to tell the jury. About the time you were in college, can you tell the jury about Ted Wiley? What you know about that?
Well, going back to my senior year of high school, my mother's mother, had open heart surgery, and she had to go up there and stay with her all the time, and my father would text me and tell my other siblings about Ted, and it was a speculation at first, and then it came to a point where my father would send me pictures of things that were not appropriate, that were possibly sent to my mother's phone, and at that point I told him I didn't want to be involved and I didn't want to know. I felt like I was a child at that point and I didn't need to be involved, and I was very upset. So it ended up that it turned out really bad, and she went up there and was, I guess, I don't know if she was staying with him, I didn't ask. But my dad was at home and he was alone, and I was at Georgia Southern and I wasn't doing well anyways, and I said, I'm going to come home and I'm going to live with my dad. And I did. I came home and I lived, and it was not long after that that my mom came in and she decided to come back home. And at that time, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be involved. So I was dating a guy at the time. He had an apartment and I went and lived with him. One of the worst decisions I've ever made.
This was that loser you were telling us
That was
about.
that loser.
Okay. And so that's what you remember from that era?
From that era, yes.
But your dad knew about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was...
And everybody else in the family?
Everybody knew about it.
Okay. And would you just, kind of earlier you said about kind of the bickering and the way that they would communicate, that just became part of everybody's life.
Yeah.
Would you give that same assessment to any extramarital relationships both your parents would have?
I didn't know of any extramarital affairs that my father had.
Okay. But even your mom, as far as how it just became accepted by the family, and this was, though odd, this is how we live.
It was accepted because my father accepted it. I just made a comment that was not the best about my mother to my father, and he got very mad at me. He said I was not to speak to her about her like that. And after that, I didn't talk to him about it, and I stayed out of it, and that's where I left it. It was his choice. So that was it. That was their normal. They accepted it. They knew what they were doing.
Okay. What about the other siblings? Did y'all talk about it at all?
Oh yeah, we talked about it. They had far more anger for my mother, which I felt like I should have had, just because I feel like there were moments of manipulation in the sense of like, I'd go up to Alabama with her, and I think that she would kind of use me as like, oh, I'm going up with Amanda, and then I'd be left at home, or I don't know. It's all speculation. All I can do is assume, but I don't feel like things were not going the way that they should have, and I think sins were committed in that I think both of them needed to address, and they didn't. They refused to.
Okay. So, kind of moving back closer in time, is it fair to say that Scott and your mother were actually pretty close?
Oh, they spent almost every day together. They would go up to what is called, I think, Scottsdale Farms. Scott loved to decorate. He was always doing something, whether it be outside or inside the barn, or they were always together. They always went up to Cherokee Ranch. I mean, all of us did everything with my mom.
What does that mean?
We all had a relationship with her. And Chris took his girls to be with her all the time. I don't know if they necessarily I guess they did stuff together. I didn't see where they did.
Did you know that the girls basically, when Chris would get them from Maine, they would spend the vast majority of their time
they came over to my mother's.
And they would call her Grandma. Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay.
They spent all their time with my mother. She was great-grandmother.
Okay.
His great-grandmother.
And she keeps your son, correct?
She did.
Okay. So they were close. Did they ever fight? Any altercations?
I'm sure.
Well, what you would have known.
I think they would fight when my mother would call them out on their stuff, and they didn't like it. And I'm sure that they felt the same way about her. But I mean, there was always an underlying anger that never went away. I think we all knew what was there, and the betray and the mistrust there that never went away. But we did as Daddy did, and we just swept it under the rug, and we just kept moving. We just kept our family.
So let's move to 2018. Okay. Do you remember any of your dad's medical spells? They would call them episodes.
Yeah, I mean, he said he would get sick and he would have to lie down, whether it be for 24 or 48 hours. I don't know. He would tell me he didn't feel well, and I'd beg him to go to the hospital. I mean, you've got to figure this out. I mean, he was not the healthiest man. But he refused. I remember trying to get him off of cigarettes. I tried to get him to, I was like, at least vape. I know it's still terrible, but it's not cigarettes. And refused and stuck in his ways and drank Mountain Dews. But he refused to do anything about it, ever. And then the one that sticks out to me the most in 2018, I had to be a few months before he died, because we were supposed to go to our wedding venue, and he got really sick, and my mom had called me the night before and said that he was going into a diabetic shock or something, but something was wrong with him. And Scott was there. They were trying to get him to the hospital, and I didn't see him until the next day, but I walked in and he was perfectly fine, just sitting up. So it was a shock. I mean, even Chris brought him a Mountain Dew in the hospital. And
not even a Diet Mountain Dew?
No.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there, and it was like, Daddy, I won't go to this wedding venue if you don't want me to. And he's like, no, baby girl, go. He was always, baby girl, go ahead and do it. Because I always asked his permission for everything. I was like, are you sure it's okay that I go with Mama to go tour this venue? And he said, yes, please go. And same venue, we ended up putting a deposit down, and we never got married there. So yeah, he was not in good health.
So I want to move into the summer of 2018. And so in that summer, you guys would pretty much go up there and have dinners every weekend.
Every weekend, almost, yeah.
And your now stepdaughter, Cameron, she'd go too.
Yeah, if she was with us, yes.
Okay. The jury would have they've met Cameron, and everything. How did it seem when you went that summer? Just normal?
Fine. It was just us there. Scott maybe come in once and leave, but Chris wasn't there unless the girls were there. Emily was in Tennessee, so she was never there. So it was just the four of us. 5 if Cameron went. My mom would cook, and we'd all eat dinner and stay till about 9, 10, and then go home.
So you tell the jury about the weekend before his birthday, from everything you can remember about that.
Well,
just that weekend. Who was there? What was going on?
The Saturday before, we had a big gathering in the house, and everybody was there. Chris, Scott, Emily, Chris Payne, Olivia, me, Chad. I don't think Cameron was there. She wouldn't have been there. And we just had dinner, and my mama cooked, and we had cake, and that was it. And we went home, and then Sunday.
Well, I'll ask you this. I mean, did everything seem normal?
Yeah. Our normal, yeah.
Okay.
Everybody gets along. We had a great time.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Sunday, the next morning, we woke up and we went to go eat brunch. I don't know what time. Could have been near lunch time. We walked into Jay Christopher's over there, I think closer to their house. Emily was supposed to go back to Tennessee. I was asking to see if she would go with me and Daddy and my mom to go to a wedding store in Roswell to go look at dresses, and we ended up not going. And because she had to go back, and we had breakfast. Yeah, it was just a normal breakfast. I don't know. And then my dad's birthday would have been in the middle of the week, I guess it was. It was a weekday. And we invited everybody. I didn't invite my mom because I thought my dad wouldn't like it. Boy, was I wrong. He was very upset that I did not invite her.
Well, what day was that?
I don't remember. June 27th.
Okay.
I don't know.
So the week before?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Chris texted at last minute, said he couldn't come. He said he was busy or something and he couldn't go. Scott didn't go. He was up there at the house, I guess, but he didn't go. So Chad and I had dinner with him at I can't remember the name of it, a Cajun place in Roswell Road, I believe. And that was his last birthday.
Okay. So let's move on into July the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Things you saw and any interactions you had with your mother and Scott or anybody in the family at that time. So let's go to, did you talk to your mom at all on the 3rd that you can remember?
I can recall because I went through text messages. I'd worked that day, worked at a jewelry store, so I would have worked from 9 to 6. And, I mean, I had texted her all the time.
And you remember y'all were kind of texting to some degree. Chris had either... How did it come to pass that Chris had convinced your dad to pay for his vacation? Did you know anything about that?
My mother had told me that Chris had booked another vacation. In my eyes, Daddy didn't go on vacation. Daddy loved to work. He just didn't do that. So it was kind of shocking. I kind of perceived it as Chris wanted a free hotel room or a condo. In my eyes, but
your brother Chris, he offered, I believe, he was going to on this trip pay for all the food.
I don't know. Do
you believe him if I were to tell you that he said that he was going to pay for all the food and the fishing and everything?
Doubtful.
Okay. Why would that be?
He never had any money to do that. He always had to ask for money for everything. He couldn't fly the girls in from Maine without help. So I don't see how that could have been possible.
Shock you that on the day of the 5th, after you guys had been investigated that day and you talked to Detective Hayes and Kuykendall, that he actually had to borrow $20 from Emily to get home? Did you ever hear about that?
No.
Okay. So you're talking to your mom some about that stuff that day and wedding stuff. Do you remember that?
Probably at that time. I was in full wedding mode trying to plan our wedding because we had the deposit down at Vauxhall.
But did anything seem out of the normal that day?
No.
Just a normal life, normal communications with your mother?
I was in bliss. I was engaged. I was the happiest I've ever been.
Okay.
Everything was perfect in my eyes.
So the next morning, on the 4th, I believe you guys even had some phone conversations. Do you remember anything about that?
Well, we had picked up Cameron the night before because it was our time to have her come over, and so we drove up to Jefferson and got her and brought her home, and then we were going to Lake Lanier because that's what we do every year.
And you take your mom every year?
No.
Okay.
Since we were up there the weekend before, we'd asked I asked my mother and Chad asked my dad.
Okay.
And my dad did not want to go, and I told my mom, I said, if you want to go, you're more than welcome, but this is what we're doing. This is our plans.
Okay. What do you remember about inviting her?
I just invited her. I was just like, hey, we're going to go do this. If you want to do something on 4th of July, this is where we'll be. It's fun. It's a fun place.
What did she say?
I think she said, sure, maybe, yeah, I'll go. I mean, she had told me the weekend before she was going to go.
Okay. And then the morning of the 4th, you guys were texting about it and talking about it. Did anything seem weird or out of place?
No. We woke up and we went out there. It was super packed. So
this is Margaritaville.
Margaritaville, yep. The whole beach was packed. All the chairs were taken. And I called her and was like, hey, we're going to go back home and we're going to get our chairs and stuff because there's nowhere to sit. But we put up our little pop-up tent and saved a spot because we lived 5 minutes down the road, not even. And told her we were going to go get our chairs and come back, and I told her she needed to bring one if she had one. And then she said she was working out in the yard and that she would be there later. And I said, okay.
And so she came?
Yeah, eventually around 12, 1 o'clock, I guess it was. It was later.
About noon?
Yeah,
okay.
I would say so.
Somewhere in there. How did she seem? How was her demeanor?
Normal.
What did y'all do?
We roasted on the beach for a while, and then went to Land Shark Cafe, and because it was unbearably hot, and then we ate lunch. She ate with us. Cameron was there, and we went back to the beach, sat there for a while. I don't know if we did any of the water slides or anything that day, but I think it was 5, 6 o'clock maybe, and Cameron was begging to go be with Addison. We were like, I don't know, because we had just picked her up the night before.
Would Cameron and Addison, they communicate to themselves via text?
Yeah, they were friends at that time, yeah.
Okay, so they'd already kind of figured out they're going back to Grandma's.
Yeah, they were essentially the same age. They like hanging out with each other.
Okay, so I guess Cameron told you, hey, I'm going back with Melody.
No, she asked, and Chad and I were like, I don't know, because we picked her up the night before, and we were like, I don't know, we really didn't want to, but she begged, and so we were like, all right, for one night you can go out there, and Chad was supposed to work the next day, and I had the day off, so I was going to go, and I was like, I'll pick you up, and then we'll go shopping.
And that would have been on the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but back on the 4th, Cameron how did your mom respond when she asked to come over?
She said, okay, have you talked to Addison? And I don't know if my mother talked to Chris or not, but Cameron got in the car with her and they rode back.
Okay. Did y'all have any communication with Cameron that night or the next morning?
I probably wouldn't have. Chad would have.
Okay.
I was more or less, and I still am more or less, Chad's wife. She has a mom, and I didn't mother her by any means, so it would have been Chad that checked up on her.
Secondary parent role, step parent.
Correct.
Okay. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nope. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. So how did it come to pass that you were going to come the next morning and pick up Cameron? Because you were off that day?
I was off that day, so I knew I was going to have to go pick her up. But his father was living with us at the time. He had gotten in an accident and had to live with us because he was in the hospital for a while. So we took care of him. And he asked me that morning if I could drive him over to his friend Debbie's house. So I agreed and took him over there, and could have been 10:30 by the time I actually left the area. I'm not sure. But I drove directly over to my parents' house, and that's when I got there.
Okay. So somewhere between 10:30 and 11, you think?
Could have been. It was mid-morning.
All right. I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as Thrasher Exhibit 20. Was this the porch on your parents' house?
Yes.
All right. When you got there, what did you and your mom do?
She was sitting out on the front porch.
This porch?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there some chairs right over here?
They're rocking chairs.
Okay.
I pulled up in the driveway, and I parked and walked up. I think the girls were out there at that time. I know they came out there at some point. But she immediately said, "We've been looking for your daddy, and we don't know where he is."
She said that to you?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't bring up to her, "Hey, where's daddy"?
Not that I can recall. I just remember her bringing it up because I was like, I don't know.
Was that early in the conversation? Had you?
Yeah, it was like immediately once I got there.
Okay. Then what did you go do next?
Well, I started talking to her, and I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" She was like, I can't find him." And I was like, "Well, where?" I mean, it wasn't unusual for them not to know where each other was at, but I was like, okay, and I kind of brushed it off. I was like, I wasn't worried about it. And so then she was like, "No, really, like..."
Did she seem nervous? Like
Not nervous, but she seemed concerned.
Okay.
And I don't know if the girls were looking for him or whatnot. I have no idea. She just said that she could not find him. And I was like, "What do you mean?" I didn't understand. A lot about that day I didn't understand. But it wasn't long after Scott came up. Again, you don't go on that property and not show up immediately. And he came up, and I asked him, I said, "Have you seen Daddy?" And he was like, "No, I haven't seen him." And so then it just escalated into, it's all kind of a blur, but it escalated into, we need to find him. And
Did Scott say anything else that was odd or weird?
Well, I don't know if it was when I decided to search the house and just walk through it, or like, I don't know which one came first, or like, I know I called Chris, I know I called Emily, I know I called Angela, I know I texted him, I emailed him, I called him, and none of those nobody knew where he was. But at some point I decided, I was like, I'm gonna go look in the house, and I started in the upstairs, but before I stepped foot in that house, Scott looked at me and said, "I'm gonna go look for a missing gun."
He said that to you?
He said that to me. And I remember...
As you're standing here at this door right here, this green door?
Yes.
Okay. And he just like grabbed you by the arm and said, "I'm going to look for a missing gun."
He didn't grab me by the arm, but he just turned and he put his hand on the door and he said, "I'm going to go look for a missing gun." And I'm like, and I kind of like, I remember, I was like, what is he talking about? And she was like, "I don't know." And so he went into the house. And
so he was the first one in the house before you went in there?
He walked in the door first. I don't
Okay.
know where he went, because when I went straight up the stairs. I looked upstairs, I looked on the middle floor, and then I went to the bottom floor. And then that's when I proceeded to go outside.
Did you go up these stairs?
Correct.
And that's just walking straight in the door?
Straight in the door.
And if you take a right here, is that the kitchen?
Correct.
Okay. And that's looking back out that door?
Yes.
And you went upstairs. What did you do upstairs?
Just looked to see if he was anywhere. There was a door that went to like an attic, like a walk-in attic, and I checked everywhere.
Okay. So this was the kitchen. Obviously, there's no furniture or anything, but this is the general layout of the home at the time.
Correct.
All right. So where did you go next after going upstairs?
I just walked to the main level. I don't know if I walked in the master bedroom. That would have been to the right, straight back from there. And then I walked in the basement.
Where did you go in the basement?
Probably into my dad's room. That would have been in that hallway right there.
Going towards these doors here?
No, the other way.
The other direction?
His bedroom was there, and then he had a bathroom that was over there straight back too. I probably would have looked there, I assume, just to see if he was there, since it was his room, and there was the living room, and then I just walked straight into his office, because you could pass by the theater room, and I went into his office, and he wasn't in there.
Okay, so this thing they've got listed on this Thrasher 17, this workshop, that was his office?
Yes.
Okay. And nothing, when you walked down into the basement, did you see anything out of place?
No.
And because you'd been down there, I mean, how often would you go to the basement?
I mean, every time we were over there, we would probably most likely go down in the basement because my dad was always working in his office.
So when you were down there, did you notice anything, you know, this looks like a bunch of very fine furniture. Did you notice anything broken?
Mm-mm.
Did you, I mean, what's underneath these candles appears to be glass fixtures holding up the candles.
Correct.
Anything out of place?
No.
Did you notice any blood?
No.
Now, had you been there the weekend before, did you ever notice anything about your father being bit by a dog or anything like that?
Yes. When we walked into Jay Christopher's, my husband and I was on the right, he was on the left, and my dad was in front of us, and he was walking up the stairs because it was like a few stairs to go up into Jay Christopher's, I believe, and it was an awful, like, purple dog bite on the back side of his leg, like right above that, whatever, I guess that tendon that is. And my husband said, "Damn, Gary, like, what happened to your leg?" He said, "That damn dog bit me," meaning Motley, her little black, her little terrier dog.
So Motley was a kind of an ankle biter.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yes, I don't like that dog.
For lack of a better term. But you saw with your own eyes this injury to your dad's leg.
Yes, it was bad.
And it was from the weekend before his death.
It was purple by the time I saw it, and red. It looked bad.
Okay.
Enough for us to notice it.
So you walked past this dining room. These pictures were taken on the day of the 5th. This is Thrasher 81. You walked past this dining room, and this is how it looked?
Yes, sir.
On that day? You notice anything broken or out of place there?
No.
This was your mom's room?
Correct.
Where was the mudroom in the house?
You just passed it. There was like the mudroom was the long kind of hallway, and it had a desk and cabinets, and then that was off of the mudroom, and it had the washer and dryer. My dad had like his cowboy hat hung up on the wall to the left there, and that was the mudroom. And then there was a pantry.
This is your dad's cowboy hat?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is Motley's bed?
Yeah. Well, all the dogs' bed.
How many dogs lived in the house?
Too many. We had Motley, Lucy. One time we had what we called Elizabeth Taylor. She was a little teacup Shih Tzu. They had Luke, Leroy. They were the biggest white labs I've ever seen in my entire life. And then Scott had a Chihuahua. And I think that's all the dogs he had. I know he had some cats too, but the cats never came in the house.
Did your dad tell you where he was bitten by the dog?
For Motley?
Yes.
I mean, it was on the back of his leg.
Well, no. Where in the house? Where was he when it? Did he say?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So you never would have seen any of these droplets of alleged blood?
No.
And you went down these very stairs on this same day, yes?
And many times after that.
Walked past these floors?
I would not have been looking.
And the furniture would have been exactly like this on that day?
Yes.
Did Scott ever tell you that this was the drawer where he said the gun was missing from?
No.
Okay. Did you check for any missing guns?
No.
Let's go back to when he said that. He goes in the house. What did he do next?
I don't know what he did. I just know he said, I'm going to go look for missing guns, and I was so taken back because our family doesn't do guns. My dad had like old shotguns that he kept in, or they're my mother's, our grandfather's, they were family
kind of in
guns.
this picture above.
Yeah, that was like an old antique gun that belonged to my mother's side of the family. But my dad had like shotguns because he would, I don't know if he went like with his law partners or something, but they would go like dove hunting, I guess, and things like that. So I always remember, as long as I can remember, there were shotguns in like those big long zip-up cases. But it's like, as far as like small guns, no.
No. So you never saw any in that house?
No.
Never saw any revolvers?
We would have never owned any.
So even back at y'all called it Hampton Hall? Mm-hmm. So you never saw a small snub-nose revolver at that house?
It was only shotguns.
Did Chris ever tell you he found a snub-nosed revolver?
No.
Back at Hampton Hall in the 2012 era? Okay. Or Scott?
No.
Okay.
The only handgun that I knew of back in Hampton Hall was when my brother was in the Army. It was a black handgun, and he had gotten it, I guess, after he got in the Army. I don't know. That was the only one I ever remember seeing, ever.
Yeah. So you walked down here, and you knew Scott had been in the house, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't see any of these droplets of blood?
No.
I'm fast forwarding because there's one image I specifically want to ask you. Maybe easier to go to the... Were you ever made aware that a bullet was found right there under that ottoman?
The only time I was ever aware of a bullet was during the preliminary hearing.
Okay, that's the first time you'd ever heard of that.
Correct.
And you don't know if that was, you didn't know anything about it?
No, and I would have never looked there.
So you never saw this bullet?
No.
Laying in the floor?
No.
Do you find it odd that there is nothing around that bullet?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing that would have caught your imagination. No blood, no holes in the chair, nothing. It's just this bullet laying next to a piece of carpet.
If you compare it to all your Netflix documentaries, no, it doesn't make any sense.
So you never saw that?
No.
Okay, so Scott went in the house first before anybody else.
Correct.
That morning. Then what did Scott do? What did everybody do?
I don't remember where he went. I know that I went out my dad's office, and you could walk down because I knew he was making the burn pile on like July 3rd because I remember Chris went over there and all of that, and that was known. And so I had walked down, and my mother came up shortly behind me, and I saw one stream of like smoke coming off of the top of it, and there was like one stick that was laying by the side, and I just picked it up and tossed it on there, and she was there, and I was like, it's still like smoldering. She was like, yeah, it's gonna be hot for a while, and I was like, okay. And I turned around and looked up, and Scott was standing at the top of the hill, like where the driveway is, with both arms on his hips, just staring down at us. And at the time, I was just like, mental image, I guess, and I was just like, okay. So I walked the edge of the property because
there's a pretty steep hill there. Did you go all the way down that steep hill?
I didn't think it was steep, but I went down there. I mean, I probably had sandals on, but I walked all the way down. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking something happened to my dad. He's been out here working on the property, may have fallen out. Let's go look for him. So I'm searching everywhere, and I go walk that property line, and I go over the dam that's by the left of the pond if you're standing on that side. And I walked up to the barn, probably walked either through the barn or around the barn. I don't really remember.
Now, I ask you this. Do you ever remember around this time Scott saying anything about the placement of the tractor? Did he bring that up? Did you hear that?
No.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Where you walked?
Walked up there, and I was calling out his name, trying to find him. I was getting desperate at this point and hoping I would find him. And I just had this gut feeling that something was wrong, and I had turned and walked down the driveway, and I was standing right as the driveway dips, and Scott calls me.
On your phone?
On my phone. And I'm looking over the pond and kind of just standing there at the fence, and he goes, Amanda, like something to the tune of like, Daddy's in this burn pile. Like, I know what I've seen. I've been in Iraq. I know what burned bodies looked like. And I'm just sitting there on the phone going, what are you talking about? And he was like, there's something in this burn pile. And I was like, what are you talking about? In pure just denial, I guess. And either he hung up the phone or I hung up, but I immediately called Chad and I said, you need to get here right now. This is what Scott is saying, and you need to come get Cameron. You have to come get your daughter. And next thing I know, I don't know if he walked over. I mean, everything, your whole world stops. And he came over and grabbed me by the arm as hard as he could, and he got in my face.
Who are we talking about?
Scott.
Okay.
He got in my face and he screamed at me. He said, I know what I saw. I know what it is, Amanda. And I was just, again, going like, what? And next thing I know, he said he called the 911, paramedics, whatever, and I walk up to the driveway, and there's like a fork in the road.
I have to ask you this question, and I'll move on from this topic quickly. But you walked down to the burn pile earlier. And you and your mom looked at it together.
Briefly.
And neither one of you saw what you would believe to have been human remains.
Thank God, no.
But you say Scott was up behind you on the hill just staring at you both.
Yes.
Okay. So going back to when the paramedics arrived, what happened next?
I was standing in the driveway and my mom had walked up. And I was like, what is going on? She said, I don't know. She just kept saying, I don't know. And I was just in shock at this point. And next thing I know, fire trucks, paramedics, and all of this. And she just said, why is he holding them up at the end of the driveway? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. And it felt like an eternity. And I refused to go over there. I didn't want to go over there. And this poor paramedic, I'll never forget him. He was standing there with a gurney, and he goes, I'm so sorry for your loss. And that was the first time anybody ever told me about my dad being dead. And I said, so you're telling me that my dad is in that burn pile back there? And he just looked at me in shock. It was just like, he couldn't say anything back. And Chris was sitting on the bed of his truck, just looking down at the ground. He didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything?
No.
And what was your brother Scott doing at that time?
I don't know. I guess they were over there, him and my mom. I don't know.
Did your brother, and I think I'm going to ask the judge after this question to go ahead and break here, because then we're going to go ahead and start talking about what happened after this day. But did your brother say anything else concerning at that time? And he'd mentioned a gun. Did he say anything else that resonates in your memory?
Which one, Chris or Scott?
Either one.
No, Chris, no.
What about Scott?
I don't think I talked to Scott much after that. I think he was off. I don't really recall. I really felt like every bone in my body was broken at that point. I remember talking to Hayes for a little bit and standing at the fence. And he could have told me I had purple hair and 5 eyes. I wouldn't have recalled. And I just kept going through my head of just like, if he's gone, he's like, our life has changed forever. And it was awful. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
I'm going to show you what has been previously marked as, I believe, bot song 4. Is this you?
Yes.
Were you aware there was a trail camera on the property?
No, not really.
Okay. And is this your mother?
Yes.
Okay. And that's spot song 5. And who is this?
Scott.
Is that also Scott?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you a question, and then I think we should probably go ahead and break before we move on to the next phase. Would it shock you to know that Scott Farris deleted, that's a picture of him backing away from the phone, from the trail cam after deleting the trail cam at that very moment as y'all are searching for your daddy?
Yes. It would shock me. We were looking for my dad. Why? I don't. Like, again, I didn't know that he had a trail camera. But that is concerning.
Judge, I think we should break.
Here. So we'll break for lunch. We're going to take an hour, so we'll start back up at 1 o'clock.